It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
You underestimate my power!
Don't try it!
Hey! Happy Monday, May 4th. May the 4th be with you for any of my Star Wars fans out there. If you're like one of those OG Star Wars fans, like you've seen all the old ones, like I have, before, the new ones, comment below. We can be fans together. And if any of you like Star Wars fans have like seen like the entire, from like Star Wars 1 all the way to the very last one that was it 9? The very last one that came out like a year ago or something. I have much words about that ending, much feelings, negative words. Yeah. We can talk about it on Thursday, maybe, if there are other people that also have strong feelings and words about this. Okay, so Star Wars Day aside, semi-important announcement. Last I heard, starting today, some of the parks and trails and stuff like that in San Mateo County are being open for people to like walk in or, kind of hike or whatever. So yeah, that's exciting, but, just be safe if you're going to those places. I don't know, I'm thinking I might, like, maybe this weekend or something, I'll, like, go to the one of the, like, park areas that's nearest me, but I'm going to be ready to, like, turn around if I see, like, a bunch of people there, because I'm sure everybody is going to want to go, like, immediately, all at the same time, just because it's, like, finally being reopened again. So yeah, be safe when you're, going outside to visit parks and stuff. All right, so this week we're going to be focusing on, still focusing on kind of our consumer habits, our consumption lifestyle. This lecture is going to be focusing particularly on pollution and waste. Which I know it's kind of like a downer subject, but like it's important to understand how our actions, what happens to the waste that we do generate, and then how different actions can end up polluting the environment. And it's just kind of important to have awareness of the effects of all of the actions that we take. Okay. Okay, so pollution is basically, when we think about what does polluting mean, it means you are somehow negatively changing the quality of an environment. And if you think about how an environment has different resources, right? Living resources and non-living resources, we might call them abiotic and biotic qualities to the environment. So pollution is basically decreasing the quality of those different resources. So like in an environment, you have air, you have water, you have the habitat itself, like where things can live, and then you have the living species in them. And pollution, you can pollute all of those different resources. You could pollute the water, the air. You could pollute the environment so that it's not a very healthy place for species to live. And then finally, the living species themselves can become polluted if they start, accumulating toxins from the environment, and then those toxins start building up inside those species, and then, the health of the species declines, and therefore the quality of those species is declining. And pollution tends to be pretty difficult to clean up, especially if it's in like water or air, because it can be really hard to separate out polluting substance, because in the air the pollution is going to be in the form of a gas. You're not going to have like an object just you're not going to have like trash floating in the air. It's going to be a gas that will kind of float in the air and mix in with all the other gases that are supposed to be there, like oxygen and nitrogen and stuff like that. And so it can be really difficult to kind of separate out the chemicals that are polluting the air. Same with water. And because it can be really difficult to clean up pollution, really the best strategy is just to prevent it altogether, so that you don't have any messes that you later have to clean up. So we're going to talk about air pollution and water pollution, some of the ways that this pollution happens through different human actions. And for each one, air and water pollution, we're going to talk about actions that are kind of being done like on a, like, how do I phrase this, like large scale actions and then individual scale actions. So like there are some things for air and water pollution that you really have no control over because you're not involved in that. It's more of a manufacturing companies or other like industries are doing these actions. You would never be doing this yourself. But there are also I don't want us to like feel like we're off the hook, like we're not really major contributors to air and water pollution, because there are still like other things that we do individually, and then if you take into account all the other individuals on the planet collectively, we still contribute a significant source of air and water pollution. So let's start with water pollution. So some of the ways that water gets polluted. Fracking, I didn't really go over this with you in the lecture where we talked about like non-renewable energy, but fracking is basically it's a method that is used to extract natural gas to use as like fuel for electricity or energy. And basically what it's doing is it's pumping a liquid mixture into the ground at a very high pressure to try to extract the natural gas. And this can end up, that mixture that's being pumped into the ground can contain toxic chemicals, and then it can end up kind of polluting the groundwater and the aquifers that are nearby, and then that makes it very hard to clean once your groundwater is contaminated. Similar, alongside with trying to extract non-renewable energy sources, mining is also a heavy polluter of the rivers, just because of the nature of, you have a lot of like different you've got a lot of different metal apparatuses that might and you're using different chemicals to try to like extract out metals and stuff like that, and separate metals from ore and stuff like that, and then when these mining sites get abandoned, the chemicals that were there and the waste that was collected, the chemical waste that was collected from doing processes of extracting metal and whatnot, that's just left there, and it can be leaching into the surrounding soil and then polluting the soil, which then pollutes the nearby waters. And I think I mentioned this about like how the mercury pollution in the bay, the actual like San Francisco Bay and the rivers that feed into the bay, because of like the mining that was happening back in like the mid 1900s. Okay, so now we're getting a little closer to like what we as individuals might ever end up doing. Nutrients from sewage, and then this is kind of talking more like agriculture and farm, but sewage, and then manure, like farm cow, farm animal manure, and then fertilizers from like you're using fertilizers to grow your crops if you're a farmer, and all the there are actual like fertilizer and manure and stuff like that. It has nutrients in it, such as like nitrogen or phosphorus, and so that's why manure is sometimes used as a fertilizer for plants, because it's rich in like nitrogen and other nutrients that plants need. But the problem is that if this runoff of sewage and fertilizer and other stuff is kind of running into the nearby waters, it can basically, this influx of, let's say, nitrogen and other nutrients, it causes a bunch of algae to start growing and blooming. And this is fine, like in a normal balance, but if it's happening like too suddenly and too much at the same time, then what happens is you have an algal bloom, and then it's going to just start choking out all the other plants in that water area, and then it'll block out the sunlight, and then all the oxygen is going to get depleted in that water ecosystem, and then all the fish are going to die, and it just is going to create a dead zone because, you know, the ecosystem got unbalanced by this sudden growth in algal bloom. So once again, sometimes environmental harm is coming in the form of something that is natural and might, you know, normally be a good thing, but if it's not happening with the right balance, then it turns into a bad thing. So it's that kind of like too much of a good thing equals a bad thing kind of mentality. And then finally, biomagnification is kind of the picture that you see on the upper right with the fish. And so basically the idea here is, if toxins are entering a water system, and let's say the very bottom of the food chain, like zooplankton or something, are you know, absorbing these toxins. So then the fish that are going to eat that zooplankton, they're going to also basically be eating those toxins that are stuck inside of the zooplankton. And then the fish are gonna, you know, they're gonna eat many zooplankton, so they're going to accumulate a bunch of the little toxins in their bodies. Bigger fish will eat many of those smaller fish, and so the toxins just keep accumulating at a higher and higher concentration as you keep going up the food chain. And you know who's at the very top of every food chain? Us. And so this is how, you know, it comes back around to affect us. You know, if the species and animals in the water ecosystems are being contaminated with toxins, and then we eat those animals that are also contaminated with toxins, it can also negatively affect us. You know, not that we should only care about something if it's affecting us, but just to point out that it is going to affect us too. It's not just like, okay, it's removed and it's only hurting this area and it's not going to, you know, affect me. You know, plastics in the ocean. We've all heard about plastics in the ocean, you know, like that picture of the globe on the bottom. I'm pretty sure that's a picture of that great garbage patch that's this gyre in the Pacific Ocean, which basically is this floating island of plastic the size of Texas. And yeah, and it's really dangerous to animals in the ocean because they don't know what plastic is. They can't learn that, oh, this is bad for me, I shouldn't eat it. They just have no idea. They might think, oh, maybe it's food, and then it gets stuck in them for like ever. I'll put a link in the description box of this video that I saw about like how about like some of the effects of plastic that, I don't know, it was kind of like, oh, like it kind of made me more aware that you know, just the kind of the far-reaching effects of plastic. Okay. So the thing I wanted to kind of point out. So we started with talking with water pollution. We talked about, like, you know, very big processes that we don't really have much to do with, like fracking and mining. We don't really control that except through our voting. You know, when we and, you know, petitions and lobbying and supporting you know, supporting organizations that may be trying to like petition against, you know, mining in a certain area. That's really the only way we get to like have control over that. And it is important. It's important to be involved and knowledgeable about what are the changes that you know, governments and industries are trying to do to our environment, and just like having a voice in that. But in our individual lives, we can contribute plastics into the ocean via our clothes. And we're going to talk about clothes, I'm hoping next week for like a little bit. But when we wash our clothes, sometimes little bits of our clothes come off, especially depending on what our clothes are made of. And then it kind of just gets washed into the, sewage system and into the waterways. And so that's one way that we unknowingly are sometimes contributing to water pollution, just like, just washing your clothes. And we're not really aware that like little bits of our clothes are like coming off every time we wash it. Okay, so air pollution. Sources of air pollution, fires and combustion. Okay, so I want to pause on this because fire and like, volcanoes, volcanic ash and whatnot, this is a natural thing. This is not a bad thing. It's very natural for forest fires to happen now and then, and it's actually important for kind of like a detox for the forest, and then it kind of clears the area so that new life can spring up there. So I'm not saying that like all fires are bad. This is a very natural thing to have disturbances and then change in an ecosystem. But when it's happening at too high a severity and then too frequently, the disturbance is too severe for the ecosystem to be like adjusting and bouncing back, and that's when we get into problems. So fires that are happening too frequently, and that combined with combustion from everything that we use for transportation is polluting the air, which can, and the air pollution, the smog can contribute to lung disease. And CFC is it's a greenhouse gas. If you remember way back to that video we talked about greenhouse gases, it's it's been mostly banned from like products and stuff like that. But basically CFC it's a chemical that was in I kind of forget. I think it was like some types of aerosol sprays or something like that, and it's a very, very dangerous greenhouse gas because it basically it'll be in the air, and it's going to like destroy the ozone molecules. Ozone is the actual molecule. It's basically 3 oxygens together. And it basically, CFC destroys the ozone, which is our only protection against the UV radiation, right? We only have one atmosphere, and if our ozone like disappears, then we are subject to UV radiation from the sun, and then we have higher susceptibility for skin cancer. So sulfur dioxide, SO2, nitrous oxide, NO2, they combine with water vapor in the air, and SO2 and NO2 they come from like different energy plants. So like burning coal and stuff like that. Some of the waste that comes off from those processes can be SO2 and NO2 that kind of just float into the air. If you see from this picture, like the little plant. And when I say plant, I'm not talking about a green plant. I mean like a building plant. And you see that smoke is coming out from like the little skinny chimney thingy. And so that can cause acid rain if it's combining with water vapor, because then you can get like kind of like the sulfur, it will separate out from the oxygen, or no, the SO2 combines with like hydrogen from the water and creates like an acid, which is terrible for living species, water, soil, everything, depending on how strong the acid is. And all these gases in the air, they are greenhouse gases that you of course know contribute to climate change. You already know about that. And so we may not have much to do with burning coal and the non-renewable energy burning and stuff like that, but we do drive maybe you don't, but your parents probably drive a car. I drive a car. We use different sources, different forms of modern transportation, and most of our modern transportation, at least here in America or California, it's not based on renewable energy. It's using normal forms of fuel, non-renewable energy sources, which is our current normal. And so that combustion is continuing to contribute to air pollution and greenhouse gases. So that's kind of the major way that we contribute to air pollution. Okay, and lastly, we're going to talk about, or this is not the last thing we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about waste, because this is probably what we're more familiar with, because we actually deal with it in our houses, because you take the trash out, or somebody in your house takes the trash out. There's two ways to deal with the trash. After you take the trash out and you get it out of your house, something has to be done with it, and there's two things that can be done. You can either landfill, which means you're basically just burying it like a dead body underground. Problem is that it requires lots of space, so you gotta find space to be burying all this trash. And then when it's underground, it's gonna be packed really tightly, and then as it starts, degrading and decomposing, it's gonna create this really concentrated kind of sludgy thing called leachate, and that can contaminate the soil and groundwater with toxins of whatever is in that landfill. And so methane can be generated because especially if organic material, like stuff that should have been composted, and if you think to yourself, oh, it's okay if I don't put it in compost and I just throw it in the trash because it's going to naturally break down anyway. Well, yes, but normally if it's being composted, it's breaking down with oxygen around it, and so then it kind of it breaks down what we call aerobically. But in landfill, because everything's so packed together, because it's like you're trying to fit in the maximum amount of trash in a limited amount of space underground, it's packed so tightly that there is no oxygen. There is no room left for these organic materials to decompose in oxygen. And so it's going to decompose anaerobically, and that anaerobic decomposition is going to generate methane, which is a greenhouse gas that we are familiar with. The other alternative is you could burn it. If you don't want to bury it, or you have no room to bury it, you can burn it. But this is dangerous because you can create more air pollution, because you get toxins that are being burned off into the air. But then you also get this very concentrated ash, stuff that doesn't turn into air particles, and you have this ash that may contain a lot of like really concentrated toxins. You have to do something with that too. So it's like, what are you going to do with the ash? So, but on the reason why incineration is a viable option is just because it uses less space than landfill. So, so these are two pictures of the landfill process and the incineration process. And in both pictures, it kind of looks like like the best case scenario of like trying to be careful about the leachate, from the landfill, that sludge. So like in the top picture, you see that trash goes into a hole, it gets compacted, and then at the bottom they have this system to collect that sludge thing, and then they try to extract the methane out to use it for fuel, so that it's not just floating freely and into the atmosphere. And with the incinerator, in the incinerator picture on the right, they're trying to kind of extract out or trap the air pollutants before it actually goes into the air. So that's kind of like your best case scenario. But again, I mean, it's not like this is not the most ideal solution for stuff. The most ideal is to have stuff that would naturally break down in a safe way and not be toxic to any environment. And so with waste management and waste production, the thing that is really important that we kind of talked about all the way back at the very beginning when we talked about those 3 sustainability processes for the earth. Matter just stays on the earth. It travels in a cycle. Remember, it's just cycling around. And so what we have is what we have. The waste and the pollution that we make, it's gonna stay here. It does not magically ever just disappear. You can change it to different forms. You can try to break it down. But if something is really hard to break down, it just stays here. It doesn't disappear. And so that's the thing that we need to be mindful of, is just that what is this going to look like at the end of its life when we take a new item into our lives? Like, is this going to be able to go back into the matter cycle and then become something new and be a resource again? Or is it going to just like be really hard to break down and stay like this forever, right? And that brings us to recycling. And I do want to talk about recycling. This is the last thing we talk about. And the thing about recycling is that, it sounds like a really good idea. And I think in theory it is a really good idea. But there are a lot of caveats to this whole recycling process. And so the idea about recycling, it's you're taking stuff that was used is returned back to the beginning of the, beginning of the cycle, and it's turned into a new product. So you're reusing something instead of just throwing it away into landfill or burning it. This is a good thing, to be reusing something and giving material a second life. Problem: recycling is not. It's not like it's not like it costs nothing. You need energy, you need water, you need time, people, and money to be recycling something, because you have to transport the recycling stuff from different houses to a recycling center. And so, that takes transportation. You've got to sort the recycling. You've got to process the recycling, and then you need to actually do the method of, recycling the material so that it can be a raw material again and then be used for something else. And all that is going to take up resources. Meaning that if recycling is a market because it's using resources, then it needs to somehow, be compensated and make some money. So it's kind of dependent on market demand for aluminum, glass, and paper and stuff like that. And the thing about recycling that's potentially not a good thing is that when people think that this is fine because it's going to be recycled. Like this plastic thing is fine because it has a little number on it and it's going to be recycled. Like, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not supposed to be an encouragement to consume more plastic, right? And so sometimes if we think, okay, there's a safe method for it, it's okay. I don't have to be like mindful about this or whatever. Like it can kind of like, we can fall into that trap of thinking it's okay. It doesn't matter if I consume a lot of plastic because it can be recycled. And so that's not really what we're trying. That wasn't the intention of like trying to find a way to recycle plastic. And the thing, especially about plastic, it breaks down to a lower quality every time it's recycled. It can't be recycled forever. Eventually, it gets to this point where like you can't do anything with it anymore. Now it's just waste, and you either need to bury it or burn it. And the other the other like big caveat about recycling, it can't be contaminated. If you contaminate like the recycling batch, it's like the whole thing has to be thrown out because it's been like contaminated. Like one bad apple literally ruins the whole bunch. And so a lot of things that you think, oh, I'm recycling it because I put it into my blue bin, but if it gets thrown into the recycling truck that comes by, and then somebody else put the wrong thing into their blue bin, and then their recycling gets mixed with your recycling and it contaminates the entire batch of recyclable materials, well then all that stuff can't be recycled. And so it kind of brings the question of like, is my stuff actually getting recycled? Because it's like you don't really see it. You don't get to see if what gets contaminated, what has to be like thrown out and stuff like that. So that's why recycling, it's kind of tricky. It's not as ideal as we would like it to be. I mean, in theory, it's a really good idea, but in practice, it's it gets kind of tricky, just because when you want a whole bunch of people to be doing this same thing, if not everybody is following the rules for it or doing it the right way, sometimes, especially with recycling, it can cause contamination and basically ruin the recycling process. Yeah, okay, so that was the last thing we were going to talk about. I know that's kind of like a downer, but I think it's really important just to know really like what's happening with our stuff, and and just be aware that, like, you know, it's not all like, okay, I recycled it, I'm good, and I took care of the thing. It's not always that, like, it's not always that ideal. It's not always that much of a happy ending. And so that's why really getting to the root of the problem is, like, if you had less stuff to be throwing away and trying to recycle, you run less of the risk of trying to get rid of something that, like, ends up getting contaminated and can't be recycled. And that's why I really want us to focus on consumption. Consumption is really the best ideal solution because it gets to the heart of, like, everything. If you consume less stuff, you have less stuff to be throwing away, and you have less stuff that has to be managed later on at the end of its life cycle. All right, I hope your trash audits are going well. Mine is going well. Yeah, tomorrow we're gonna be doing, our activity is gonna be kind of exploring our kitchen. So the two main categories that we're gonna explore for the rest of our remaining, like, 2 weeks or so is our food life, and our clothes. So, and I picked those two because for me, those were the sections of my life that I was really just, like, naive and ignorant about how, you know, the choices I made regarding food and clothes and whatnot had, you know, impact. And when I started, like, you know, becoming more aware and learning more about it, it was, like, really eye-opening to me. So it was just very meaningful and impactful in my life, and that's why I chose it for you. Okay, cool. If I've got any Star Wars fans for May the 4th, comment below, share your Star Wars enthusiasm, and otherwise I'll see you Thursday, I guess. All right, have a nice day.